RIP to the chicks that's dying to be me. I don't know why I said that. It's been stuck in my head all week. I heard my brother say it, and now I've developed a tick. I can't stop saying it. Anyways, we are at law 20. I can't believe we're at law 20 already. I remember getting to law 10 earlier this year, and I was so excited because I'm like, we got to double digits, and now we're at 20. To commemorate getting to law 20, I decided to do something special for you guys, especially because you guys are all the OGs who are listening to this podcast before it becomes the number one rated podcast. I was looking at some clips from my very first few laws, and that was before I got a lot of listeners. Like, I probably had under 100 listeners per episode at that point. And I just felt like I could see whatever I wanted. I was unfiltered, I was pretty unhinged. And I feel like as the show picked up and more people started tuning in, I became a little bit more filtered and a little bit less unhinged. And sometimes I have to rewatch clips from those earlier episodes to remind myself who the fuck I am. You know, fame changes you. It's just, I'm kidding. Can you imagine? Anyway, so I decided in this episode, we are going to go back to those roots, and I'm going to try to be a little bit of a sneaky, manipulative bitch. And to make it extra special, I am making this a 2-part series. I haven't done a 2-part series on this show yet, so this is going to be super fun. So today's episode is going to be all about non-sexual seduction, how to make the dick stand up, and then next week is going to be about anti-seduction, how to make the dick sit down. I'm just kidding. There's no dick involved. This is non-sexual. Get your mind out of the gutter. Before we get started, I have a little request for my baddies. We are going to become the number one rated podcast on Spotify and Apple. Like, this is going to happen in a year or two. It's going to be number one. But one of the ways we're going to get there is by the baddies giving the show a 5-star rating. So if you haven't done this already, which I know some of y'all haven't, a lot of y'all haven't, I'm calling you out. Just stop what you're doing, 2 seconds, give it a 5-star rating, and then get back to what you were doing. Because I noticed after one of my reels went viral on Instagram, and it was a reel promoting this podcast, a lot, like every single day, the rating of the show would go down. And I think it's because the trolls and the angry men came onto Spotify and gave me a 1-star rating to make my rating go down. Because your girl was at a 5-star rating before. Anyway, let's get into seduction, non-sexual seduction. First things first, what is seduction? Can anybody in the class tell me? Anyone? No? Everyone is shy? Okay. So seduction, in both the sexual and the non-sexual sense, is luring people by hinting that you can give them what they crave most, which is usually pleasure. Okay, this is a definition of seduction that I've gotten from the Art of Seduction, which I'm going to be referring to throughout this episode. But it's not just sexual. We know that because men will literally fuck a rotisserie chicken. So like a lot of the time, you don't even need to seduce a man to have sex with you. You just have to exist and have an orifice. And it's not just about looks or lust or any of that stuff. It's a game of psychology. It's a game of subliminal influence. It's not necessarily a game of lust. It's actually more so a game of love. Yeah. So I'm going to read a passage from the Art of Seduction that's going to make this very, very clear. 87 years ago. Sorry, you guys know that as soon as I have to read something from a book, I have to say something silly. Okay, starting over. By instinct and through practice, they, as in seductresses, master the art of making people fall in love. As the first seductresses knew, it is much more effective to create love than lust. A person in love is emotional, pliable, and easily misled. The origin of the word seduction is the Latin for to lead astray. A person in lust is harder to control and, once satisfied, may easily leave you. Seducers take their time, create enchantment and the bonds of love, so that when sex ensues, it only further enslaves the victim. Creating love and enchantment becomes the model for all seductions: sexual, social, political. A person in love will surrender. So it's not just about making the dick stand up. What you're doing through this non-sexual seduction is you're making people fall in love, not necessarily with you, and in a lot of cases you don't want them to fall in love with you. You're making them fall in love with the version of themselves that you bring out. They're falling in love with the feeling that they get when they're in your presence, because you're putting them under your enchantment. Your presence is going to be like a drug. And that's why a person in love is easily misled, is easily manipulated, because people don't follow orders, they follow emotions. And guys might pretend that they're, oh my God, I'm so macho, I'm so logical, I'm so stoic, blah, 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 blah. No, they're not. No, they're not. They just pretend. So this law is going to show you exactly how to break down those defenses, put people under your enchantment, and make them fall in love with how they feel when they're around you. And this is going to help with your partner romantically. This is going to help with coworkers, your boss, people who report to you. It's going to work with pretty much anyone. So by the end of this episode, you'll have the tools to seduce, and you can go out in the world and use this based on whatever contexts that you find yourself in. So I want to set one thing straight and one thing gay, because we're in Pride Month. I have to, we have to be inclusive. So first thing is that seduction, it has this negative connotation to it. If somebody says, oh, I've been seduced, or if you say, oh, I'm going to go seduce this person, like that sounds weird. No one wants to say that, because there's this weird connotation to it that you're doing something bad. If you listened to my episode last week with Talia, we talk about how morality is a tool to control women and make us debilitated with fear, guilt, and shame. And Robert Greene says this in The Art of Seduction himself. He says seducers are amoral, not immoral. If you're immoral, it means that you've subscribed to a set of moral rules and you're violating them. A seductress is amoral because she transcends morality. She transcends these silly, stupid absolutes and these silly rules that are meant to bound her and deprive her of her power. She doesn't subscribe to morality. That's stupid. That's for peasants. Okay? That's for people who can't make the dick stand up. Sorry, you guys. I keep talking about, I have another tick today. This is my tick. So listen, we're talking about non-sexual seduction. If you hear me talking about the dick, just ignore me, okay? The second thing is, because we're in Law 20 and this is special, I've actually flipped the loophole. So the loophole this law addresses is not one that affects women necessarily. It's a patriarchal element that affects men. Because at the core of this law is the fact that men also live in this gray, hellish world. I talk about this a lot, how we're born colorful and then we get painted over with this gray brush and we just become like everybody else. Everybody's miserable, everybody's suffering, and the world is gray. Men also are subjected to this crap. And what this law does is we're going to go into the ways that men are socialized and held back by the patriarchy, because the truth is the patriarchy affects men and women. It affects all women, it affects a lot of men, and it affects us differently. So I've actually identified 5 major ways in which the patriarchy represses men, and we're going to go through those 5 traits and talk about specific characteristics of non-sexual seduction that are going to make them forget about that grayness that they're experiencing and fall under your spell. Basically, there are 9 different types of seducers/seductresses that are identified in the Art of Seduction. And you've probably heard of a lot of them. Like the best known one is the siren, right? Like somebody like Marilyn Monroe or Cleopatra. But there's 9 different types. However, there is one type out of those 9, there's one type that is the best positioned and the best suited to exploit this patriarchal loophole. Because this type of seductress puts the attention on her target. All the other seducer or seductress types, they put attention on themselves. Like the siren is this fantasy woman, or the coquette, or the charismatic. Like these are types of seductresses who draw attention to themselves and create fantasy through who they are. This type of seductress deflects that attention and puts all the attention on her target. So the target becomes the center of the universe. And this type of seductress is the charmer. Before we dive in, let me give you a little bit more detail on this charmer archetype. And I'm going to read from the Art of Seduction again. We're going to do this super quick because I want to get roller sleeves up and get down and dirty and make the dick stand up. So, in the Art of Seduction, Robert Greene says, RIP to the chicks that's dying to be me. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so he says, charm is seduction without sex. Charmers are consummate manipulators. Charmers are consummate manipulators, masking their cleverness by creating a mood of pleasure and comfort. Their method is simple. They deflect attention from themselves and focus it on their target. They understand your spirit, feel your pain, adapt to your moods. In the presence of a charmer, you feel better about yourself. Charmers do not argue or fight, complain or pester. What could be more seductive? Not for real though. By drawing you in with their indulgence, they make you dependent on them, and their power grows. Learn to cast the charmer's spell by aiming at people's primary weaknesses, vanity and self-esteem. You guys, when I was reading through this, I've read the Art of Seduction before, but I mostly read through the 24 chapters because it's divided in 2 parts. The first part is the archetypes. The second part is the actual seductive process. And then there's a bridge section between the 2 parts, which is I think 18 types of victims. And I focused, when I read the Art of Seduction a while ago, I focused on the 24 steps of the seductive process. And I didn't go too much in detail about the art of charm. But you guys, when I was reading this chapter, it was scary. Like a lot of the things that I have said on this podcast are things that he talked about here. And I didn't read this to be like, oh, I got this from this chapter. It was so fucked up. Robert, I will be suing you. Just kidding. This book was written like 20 years ago. It's actually crazy because a lot of the laws that I have talked about are actually behaviors of the charmer. So that's why I'm like, this law needs to be about the roots of where we are going, because we are all charmers. We're all charmers when we are milking the patriarchy like a cow. So for the rest of this episode, I'm going to go through the 6 characteristics of the charmer that Robert Greene identifies in The Art of Seduction. And I've mapped those traits to the ways that men are repressed by the patriarchy. And instead of using one overarching example for this law, I'm actually going to go trait by trait and draw an example from a character in Desperate Housewives. Yeah. And let me tell you guys, this episode was a motherfucker to write. It took me so long. I watched a bunch of episodes of Desperate Housewives, which was really fun. I fell down a bunch of TikTok rabbit holes, especially of Karen, Mrs. McCluskey. I love her. She is one of the best characters of the show. And I actually had to get a couple of guys to review my loopholes as they pertain to men. Okay, so this is tried and true. I didn't just pull these out of my ass. I actually had guys review this for me. So, the first characteristic of the charmer is to make your target the center of attention. And basically, what this means is just shut the fuck up and listen and observe and pick up on your target's body language, their insecurities, their demons, their weaknesses, the things that they're repressing. Understand what makes them tick. Okay, understand their childhood if you can. Understand the ways they self sabotage. Get into their mind and just understand them as thoroughly as you can. The patriarchy loophole that this characteristic addresses is the ego boost. Now, this is not necessarily a way that men have been repressed. This is more so just a surefire way of getting men to feel good about your presence, feel good about themselves, and eventually, ultimately, do what you want. So when you make your target the center of attention, you give them the ego boost. You make them feel masculine. Right now, there's a lot of stuff about toxic masculinity, and a lot of guys, they equate their own masculinity with toxic masculinity. Bless them. They're so stupid. They think that it's the same thing. So now more than ever is a great time to make them feel like their masculinity is valued and is appreciated and is an important part of who they are. So this is the oldest trick in the book of just stroking men's egos. You can do this with your partner. Absolutely, of course, do that. You can do this with your coworkers, your boss, your employees, especially if you work in a male-dominated environment. Find people's weaknesses. Everybody has weaknesses, especially men. They all have weaknesses. Some people just repress them better than others, but find those weaknesses and find ways to either exploit them or make them feel like they don't exist. If your coworker has a reputation for something that they're really proud of, like they're really good in a software or they're really good with a specific skill or whatever, stroke your ego with that so you can make them do your work for you. I used to do this a lot when I worked in the corporate world. Oh my God. Now, the character from Desperate Housewives who did a really good job at this was Edie Britt, which you might start watching the series and think, oh my gosh, she was a bit of a villain and she kind of sucked. But then just realize her only downfall was that she was just a baddie. Okay, of course, she was a little bit of a hoe, but regardless, she was an expert at making men feel seen. She knew just how to push their buttons when she was flirting with Carlos or Carl or anybody. She knew exactly how to make them feel like they were the man. And she was always goal oriented. It's true, her goal was usually to get to the dick, but she was goal oriented and a lot of times she got what she wanted. And she did a really good job at deflecting the attention from herself onto her target. She would make them open up, she would make them talk, she would make them fix things, she would do all sorts of stuff. If you've watched the show, you might be thinking, well, maybe Gabby or Renee are also good at doing this. And they are, but they had a lot of attention on themselves because they were very self-centered, relatable. And so they weren't as skilled as Edie in deflecting attention onto their target. So that's number one, make your target the center of attention. And something I forgot to mention earlier is that at the core of the charmer's charm and technique is the fact that she is not self-absorbed. I've talked about this before, especially in Law 8 on how to act dumb. Charmers are not self-absorbed. We all, as humans, are self-absorbed. We think we are the center of the universe. We think we are the sun and the stars and everything revolves around us. But the thing is, everyone thinks like that. So when you're interacting with somebody else, they think they're the center of the universe, you think you're the center of the universe, and you guys are going to clash. They can't be the sun and you be the sun. You know what happens when two like giant stars go near each other and then one of them absorbs the other and they become like a red giant or whatever? That's what's going to happen. So you don't want to absorb the other person you don't want to get absorbed by the other person. So as a charmer, it's really important to put that self-absorption aside and pretend like you are not a self-centered narcissist, okay? And that's what's going to make you so charming. It's because we're always interacting with people who are just like in their own world, and then they expect us to be part of that world and orbit them and worship them. And this doesn't mean that you are actually not the center of your own universe. This means you just have to pretend. Okay, you have to pretend. And the way you're going to do this is by being goal oriented, because you are charming and seducing people, non-sexually, with a goal in mind. You have a goal in mind when you are doing this. If you're going through to a job interview, you have a goal in mind. If you're dating a guy and you want him to be wrapped around your finger, you have a goal in mind. If you're trying to get a promotion, you have a goal in mind. So you have to be guided by a goal. You cannot do this willy-nilly and just do it for its own sake, because this takes effort and energy and time, and you want to make sure that you're doing this so you can reap the rewards. Because who the fuck cares about making some guy feel good about himself? Who cares about that? Make him feel good if he is going to give you something, if you're going to get something out of it. Okay, sorry. Sidebar, I just needed to mention that. Now, on to the next characteristic of the charmer, which is to be the source of pleasure. So, in order to do this, charmers basically distract their target from their problems. Their presence is just, it's pleasurable, it's lighthearted, it's fun, it's a breath of fresh air, and that's exactly what you want to do. Now, the patriarchy loophole that maps out to this characteristic is making men feel valued, because a lot of masculinity is tied to achievement. It's tied to doing. It's tied to getting material or financial things out of what you've put in. The outcome of their input a lot of the time is something material, financial, tangible. And a lot of men, they just crave admiration for who they are. So in this world of, oh, as a man should do this, a man should do that, which, to be fair, like, as a man should, make him feel appreciated and valued for who he is as a person, and also make sure he's being appreciated for what he does. Because honestly, like, what is more pleasurable than feeling valued and feeling appreciated? Right? Like, you feel high when somebody values you. It's amazing. So make sure you do that with your target. So for example, when your man comes home from work, greet them happily. Pretend like your whole face lights up when you see him. Ask him about his day. Take an interest in his interests. These all sound like very simple things, but because they're so simple, a lot of the time we completely overlook them. We think that in order to create pleasure, we have to do these grand gestures and these complicated things, when no, go to the basics that you are neglecting and do those first. And usually that is enough. So obviously this is a really great tactic to use on your partner. You could also use this on coworkers, people you're negotiating with, pretty much anybody outside of the home as well. Maybe at work. I used to do this a lot. You mirror your manager's jargon and their work style, because people love having themselves mirrored back to them. So I knew with certain people who just were obsessed with certain corporate jargon, or really like to do things a certain way, or send an email a certain way, or run a meeting a certain way, I would make sure to do that so that they would feel like I value what they are doing and I'm imitating it. Because what do they say? Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, or whatever. So figure out how you can be a source of pleasure for these people by making them feel valued. And in Desperate Housewives, Lynette was a source of pressure, not pleasure. Lynette was an advertising executive. She's really smart. She's had 5 kids. For what reason, I don't know. But she was very controlling, very masculine, very combative, and she was married to the true villain of the series, Tom Scavo, who was a man-child. He was a man-child. He didn't pull his weight. He wanted to quit his job and open a pizzeria, and then close the pizzeria, and then wanted to go around the country in an RV. So he was just a freaking man-child. He was the worst. But the problem with Lynette, and I'm not saying that Tom's horrible behavior was because of Lynette, but it was definitely exacerbated by it. Lynette just created a very hostile environment in their home, because she was always criticizing him, always on his back about, do this, do that, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And that drove him more into his feminine and useless tendencies. And Lynette really shows how being a source of pressure can be so anti-seductive and so counterproductive, that the other person, they feed off of your energy, right? When you're interacting with somebody, or you share a home with somebody, you mirror each other's energy. And when Lynette was so critical and so controlling of Tom, that makes people shut down because they don't want to do anything. And she also committed an unforgivable sin, which is nagging. She constantly nagged Tom, and that is the absolute worst way to try to get anything done because you can't. Nagging does not work. It does not work. And listen, we all have tendencies to be a source of pressure because people are unreliable and we ask somebody to do something, they fuck it up, or they don't do it at all, or they don't do it to our standards. And yes, that is frustrating, but we cannot get anything done when we create an environment of pressure and hostility towards people because that just makes people defensive and then they shut down and they retreat inward and nothing ever gets done. And that's why Lynette's household is literally a hellhole. So do not be like Lynette. The next characteristic of the charmer is bring antagonism into harmony. So what this means is that the charmer knows how to diffuse conflict and she knows how to smooth it over by being warm, by using flattery, by strategically indulging that person. And you don't meet tension with more tension. The patriarchy loophole that this characteristic addresses is that men are constantly in a state of competition. From boyhood, they are socialized to fight for their spot in the social hierarchy. And there's a lot of emphasis on hierarchy. Socially, through your social status and the things that you achieve, the car that you drive, the job that you have, the watch that you're wearing, and then also professionally, especially if they work in a very competitive or hierarchical environment or workplace. And it gets tiring. It gets tiring to be constantly in a state of competition and proving yourself. And sometimes what they crave most is to just have a break from that competition. And that's where you come in as a charmer and provide them a haven from that competition. They don't have to compete with you because they've already won. So your presence is a breath of fresh air. And when you can, and there's going to be lots of opportunities for this, use your femininity to complement his masculinity. A lot of guys, they just want to be a baby a lot of the time. They just want to be a big fat baby. So give him a shoulder or a bosom to cry on and let him just take a break from that gray hellhole world filled with competition that he has to live in. If you work in a really competitive workplace or a very male dominated workplace, chances are it's going to be very competitive too because these men are all freaking fighting with each other. Use that as an opportunity to make him feel, whether it's your colleague, your boss, whatever, make them feel like they've already won. They don't have to prove themselves to you. They don't have to compete with you. The character from Desperate Housewives, who does a really good job at this, is Gabby, my favorite. And listen, Gabby, she's a diva. She's materialistic. She's pretty feisty, but she never competes with men, whether it was with Carlos or her other husband, the mayor, I forget his name. There was never a competition. She was very clever with the way she negotiated. She would use, her looks. She would use her vulnerability. She'd use sex if she could. But she always made Carlos feel like he was the one in charge. When she was bargaining with him to buy a ski chalet or to spend money on this or that or whatever, she always made him feel like he was the one with the upper hand. Like she was trying to convince him because at the end of the day, he was the ultimate decision maker, even though it was actually Gabby. But she made it feel like it was Carlos. And the reason she does a really good job at this is because she's goal oriented. She wants that ski chalet. She wants those diamond earrings. So she has a goal in mind. She's got her eyes on the prize and she knows just what she needs to do to get it. The next characteristic of the charmer, number 4 out of 6, is lull your victims into ease and comfort. So this one's pretty self-explanatory. You want to make people feel comfortable and at ease because that's when they're most likely to bring their guard down. Okay, so your presence should be comforting. It should be a way to appeal to that person's self-absorption. A big tactic that Robert Greene talks about for doing this, for making people feel at ease, is to mirror your target. So you pretend that you have the same tastes and the same values as them. You mirror their mood, because remember, we talked about this in a previous episode, emotional contagion. And people love it when they feel like you are mirroring them. Psychologically, it has a really strong effect on them. Aside from mirroring, there's also another way to make people, especially men, feel at ease. And this is by providing them with emotional safety. Because they're taught from a very young age to repress their emotions and not show any emotions that might make them look weak or vulnerable, there's a lot of emotional repression that goes on with these dudes, okay? And coupled with that expectation that they have to be providers, there's always this burden that they appear strong. And you might notice that men have a lot of banter with one another, but a lot of their friendships are not very deep in the way that a lot of women's friendships are, because women are very good at, being social creatures and connectors, but men are not the same way. They don't have a lot of those deep friendships where they can go to their friend and just talk about anything or get something off of their chest. That's why a lot of men, they crave a space where they can be emotionally vulnerable and they can have that emotional safety without being judged. And this doesn't mean being a nurturer or a mother or a therapist. This just means providing that space, letting them get it off their chest without feeling like they're being judged or emasculated. That's pretty much it. You don't really have to give the advice. And obviously this will look differently with your partner versus with a colleague, for example. Maybe you start your meetings or your calls with them by first asking how they're doing. And if you notice that there's something off in their body language or that they come off really stressed, then you ask them about it so they don't feel like they always have to hide that from you. And if you do this repeatedly over time, you'll create that safe space for them. And a really good example of this from Desperate Housewives is when Tom develops postpartum depression after their 5th child that Lynette birthed, not Tom. Tom comes home one day and he says he went to the doctor and doctor said that he has postpartum. And Lynette's friend Renee was in their house when he told her this. And Lynette just brushes him off. She's like, did the doctor also talk to you about yeast infections? And it was really funny. But she completely brushes him off and gaslights him. Valid. Renee overhears this and she decides to indulge Tom. So she stays up all night with him and lets him talk and vent and get it off his chest. And then the next day they go out for dinner and Tom talks some more and talks about Lynette and just continues venting to Renee. And he does all of this because Renee provided that emotional safety for him. She provided him a space where he could be vulnerable and talk about the issues that he's experiencing without feeling judged, like Lynette does. Not to say that I am sympathetic to Tom, because I think he is truly the antagonist of the series, but this example is just a really good contrast of how one person, Renee, was able to provide emotional safety, whereas Lynette provided basically emotional hostility. All right, moving on to charmer trait number 5, show calm and self-possession in the face of adversity. Again, pretty self-explanatory in his name. You're pretty calm under pressure. You actually see adversity as a charmer. You see adversity as an opportunity to show that you can be very poised, you can be very grounded, and you are emotionally steady when you are faced with conflict. You're not emotionally reactive. You don't show emotions like anger and vengefulness, which are things that make people defensive. You're very emotionally steady and you put people at ease through your own calm disposition. So the patriarchy loophole here is not one that has to do with how men are repressed. This is, again, back to our OG type of loopholes, which is about how women are conditioned. And the thing is, as women, we are taught to carry the emotional burden of everybody around us. A lot of us are taught to be people pleasers. So what happens is we tend to blame ourselves for the emotional state of people around us. When somebody comes to us and says, hey, I have an issue or I'm upset, all of a sudden we're going through everything we could have said or done to make this person upset. We get really anxious, we get defensive, and then our emotional state obviously gets portrayed outwards. That person becomes anxious and defensive, and then we ask, oh my God, what is it that I did? Or why didn't you tell me sooner? Or something like that. And then we completely derail the conversation, which may have had nothing to do with us, And instead of listening to the person who had a problem, now we've made the conversation about ourselves. And this is inherently a very self-absorbed thing to do. I'm not saying that people pleasers and women who blame themselves are self-absorbed, but I'm saying that that's how it comes across. And that's a very counterproductive tendency because nothing will get solved. So this trait is really important because it shows us how people pleasing and guilt and self-blame kill charm. These are very anti-seductive. Okay? So we have to fight that tendency to turn inward and blame ourselves. We have to fight that tendency. We have to see it as self-absorbed, and we have to become more emotionally steady people in the face of conflicts. Because remember, if a lot of men are craving emotional safety, then we have to be in an emotional state ourselves to be able to create that safety for them. So the first thing we normally have to do is to validate people's feelings or make them feel like they're heard. And if we respond by saying, oh my God, what did I do? Or oh my God, why didn't you tell me sooner? That's not very validating. Now, a character in Desperate Housewives who does this really, really well, and I hate to say it because this is also one of my least favorite characters, is Susan. Okay? Susan has this very emotionally warm, almost like childlike emotional warmth to her. And she's a very romantic person. And she gets a lot of men. This girl gets so much dick. I don't understand. Actually, this is why she gets so much men. I'll give you an example. When her husband, Mike, confesses that he's broke, she doesn't respond by saying, oh my God, like, why didn't you tell me this sooner? Oh my God, is it because of my spending? Blah, blah, blah. No. She's hurt, but then she quickly turns it around and responds with empathy. And she sits down, goes over all the paperwork, all the financial statements. She goes and shakes down his clients who haven't paid him. She even puts their house up for rent. They move into this crappy apartment. She even takes up this casual job of doing live streams of her cleaning the house in lingerie. So this is like the pioneer version of OnlyFans. And with the OnlyFans money, she's able to get the family back on track. And Mike literally says, well, he doesn't know at this point that she's doing this, but he's like, oh, I'm so lucky to have a wife like you. So this is a really good example of, number one, don't stay with a brokey. Number two, when you're not emotionally reactive and your first instinct is to validate people and create an emotional safe space for them, then so much harmony comes out of that. It's such a game changer for everybody. Things actually get done. All right, the last trait is to make yourself useful. And in the Art of Seduction, Robert Greene says that this is one of the most seductive ways that you can charm people because you make their lives easier. You give them something valuable, you create goodwill, and you make them dependent on you. Now, the patriarchy loophole that this addresses is that masculinity glorifies autonomy. Guys are supposed to do everything on their own. They're supposed to figure it out for themselves. And there's a lot of that emphasis on doing and achieving, especially on your own. And so a lot of men, they operate just as loners, basically. They don't have anybody to fall back on. But the reality is that as humans, we cannot take on all of these burdens on our own. And so sometimes men just crave somebody who they can depend on. Not to, provide for them or anything like that, but just somebody who can ease the burden a little bit, okay? And make them feel like they're not handling everything alone. This does not mean you are the provider. This does not mean you are the man. This just means you look for some pain points in their life. You look at things that could be stressing them out or burdening them, and you either pretend to help or you do a little something that can ease that burden off of them. Okay, maybe you find out that your manager is really, really overworked, and to make it look like you're working really long hours, you schedule send emails at like 9 p.m. or 12 a.m. or these crazy hours. So it looks like you're working really, really hard. And that sends a signal to them that you're spending a long time working on this. They can count on you. And also in solidarity with them, you are now working late hours. In Desperate Housewives, Bree. Oh, I love Bree. Bree is the one who is she's always useful. She's able to do anything and everything. And this just makes so many people dependent on her. You know, if somebody needs help on learning etiquette, they come to Brie. If somebody needs help making a dish, they come to Brie. Her husband, Orson, was in a wheelchair. That was the ultimate source of dependence because he completely depended on her. And because Brie was able to do literally everything, there was always somebody knocking on her door asking for help, or people just coming back to her time and time again because she was such a useful part of their lives and made their lives easier. So this is a really good way to make people dependent on you. And I forget which law it is in the 48 Laws of Power, but there is a law. You would think I memorized it by now, but there is a law of making people dependent on you. All right, so let's talk about some exceptions super quick. Now, something that Robert Greene says in The Art of Seduction is that being a charmer doesn't really work on other charmers. So it could help to figure out first if your victim is a charmer or not, because if they are, then they might be onto you. They might be suspicious of you. And on the note of suspicion, always make sure that you are subtle. You don't want to go kissing people's ass. You don't want to go worshiping them. You want it to be subtle and not overt. You don't want to overtly flatter people because then that makes people suspicious of you. That makes it seem insincere. And then you also just kind of look like an asshole. So the whole art of charming is in its subtlety. And the last thing I'll say about this is some people are not worth charming. If you work with a hardcore misogynist, for example, they're probably not worth it. If you work with somebody who might have some questionable thoughts and tendencies, maybe you do a little bit of digging when you are looking for their insecurities and their weaknesses, and you find out that, for example, I don't know, they were abused by their mom and now they have mommy issues or something. If there's a way to find out more about them so that you can use those insecurities and those parts of their past to help you with your charm, then great. But sometimes some people are just not worth it. So you have to be the judge of that. All right, this is long. My last few episodes have been pretty long, but there's just so much content that we have to cover. So thank you everybody for tuning in. I did send out my first edition of the Baddie Brief last week, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you didn't receive it, she's probably hiding in your junk folder, so take a look there. And don't forget to rate the podcast 5 stars if you haven't already. All right, until next time, stay bad. Love you. Bye.
Rest in peace to the chicks that's dying to be me.